If you don't transfer your grandmother's estate to our account by end of business today, I will make sure you never see that beach house again." My stepfather didn't say good morning. He didn't ask how the drive down was. He just stood at the end of the kitchen table, arms crossed, my grandmother's death certificate sitting in front of him like a weapon he'd already decided to use. My mother didn't look up from her coffee. I set my bag down slowly. "Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment below and tell me what is the most outrageous thing a family member has ever asked you to do for money." I read every single one. I looked at my stepfather. I looked at the death certificate. Then I looked at my mother, who was staring into her mug like the answers to her guilt were floating somewhere in the dark liquid. Control is a luxury I couldn't afford to lose. In my line of work, when someone puts a fraudulent document in front of you, you don't argue. You smile, you ask questions, and you document everything. I'd been closing real estate transactions for 9 years. I'd caught forged deeds, fraudulent transfers, title fraud schemes that took entire law firms years to untangle. I knew exactly what my stepfather was attempting, and I knew exactly how to let him do it to himself. But first, I let myself feel it. Just for a second. Just long enough to remember why I was in that kitchen at all. My grandmother had passed 6 days ago, quietly, in her sleep, in the same house she'd lived in for 41 years. The little blue cottage, 2 blocks from the ocean in Myrtle Beach that smelled like cedar and coconut sunscreen, and the particular kind of peace I had only ever found in her presence. She was 79 years old and she had loved me without conditions my entire life, which made her something of a rare person in my world. She had also, quietly, and without telling anyone, spent the last 3 years putting her affairs in order. The beach house, free and clear, worth somewhere around $340,000 in the current market, a whole life insurance policy, $190,000, a savings account with $47,000, all of it, in a notarized handwritten will that her attorney filed with the county 2 years ago, left entirely to me. Not to my mother, not to my stepfather, not to my half-brother Derek, who was 30 years old and had never held a job longer than 4 months. To me, the granddaughter who drove down every other weekend to bring her groceries and fix the screen door and sit with her on the porch watching the tide come in. My stepfather found out the morning after the funeral. He had apparently expected to be included. He and my mother had apparently built an entire financial plan around that expectation. Renovations on their house in Charlotte, a truck for Derek, some outstanding business debts my stepfather had accumulated over what he vaguely described as a rough couple of years. He'd walked into that attorney's office the day after we buried my grandmother expecting to leave with the deed and a check, and instead he'd left with nothing but the knowledge that the 61-year-old woman he'd tolerated at Christmas for 15 years had looked directly through him and chosen her granddaughter. He had driven straight home and started making phone calls. That was 6 days ago. I had spent those 6 days doing something my stepfather could not have anticipated. I had spent them working. He didn't know what I did for a living. Not really. My mother told people I was in real estate, which technically wasn't wrong. She had stopped asking about my actual career years ago, around the time I started making more than she and my stepfather combined, and she found it easier to change the subject than to explain to her friends why her daughter wasn't asking for help anymore. They knew I handled documents. They knew I dealt with property. That was the full extent of their interest. Which meant my stepfather had no idea that the woman he was attempting to pressure over the kitchen table had spent the last 9 years as a licensed title attorney specializing in estate transfers, deed fraud, and contested inheritance litigation. He had no idea I'd been expecting this conversation for 5 days. He had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead. "Sign it over to our account," he said again, sliding a piece of paper toward me across the table. It was a quitclaim deed. Blank, in the critical places. I picked it up and looked at it and did not let my face change at all. "This transfers the cottage and authorizes the estate executor to direct all liquid assets to the family account." Your grandmother would have wanted the family taken care of. My grandmother, I thought, would have wanted to be alive to watch me burn this piece of paper. I looked at my mother. She was still looking at her coffee. There was something brittle about her this morning, something that had been building since the reading of the will, and I had watched it calcify over 6 days into whatever this was, this sitting quietly in her kitchen while her husband committed document fraud at 7:45 in the morning. "There's a problem with this transfer," I said, setting the paper down gently. My stepfather's jaw tightened. "What problem?" "The estate is in probate review." I clasped my hands on the table. When a will is filed without a co-executor, the county assigns a review period. Standard 45 days for uncontested estates, up to 90 if there are multiple property assets in different tax categories. The cottage is coastal property, which puts it in a separate county assessment bracket. If I sign this before probate closes, it flags as a fraudulent conveyance, and the entire estate freezes. We're talking federal hold, potentially IRS involvement, definitely a contested title situation that could take 2 to 3 years to untangle. My stepfather stared at me. I let the silence sit. He looked at my mother. She looked at him. The coffee sat untouched between them. He didn't know if I was lying because he didn't know enough to know, and that was his first mistake. He'd walked into this kitchen assuming that because I had grown up in this house, because I had spent my teenage years invisible and overlooked and treated like an afterthought between his real interests and my mother's performance of having it all together, that I was still that girl. That girl who said nothing when the college fund was redirected. That girl who worked doubles at the restaurant and didn't come home for Thanksgiving because she couldn't afford the gas. That girl who cried in her car in the parking lot of a Waffle House in 2016 and decided, quietly and without announcement, that she was done being someone else's resource. I wasn't that girl. I hadn't been for a long time, but I had learned something important from her. When people underestimate you, the worst thing you can do is correct them. What do we do? My mother finally asked. Her voice was small. We protect the asset, I said. My stepfather leaned forward. What does that mean? It means we have to move carefully. If the estate sits in probate review and someone contests the will, Derek, a creditor, anyone, the court could tie up the property for years. The cleanest solution is to transfer the cottage into a limited liability structure before the review period ends. An LLC, something that looks like a business transaction rather than an inheritance, which bypasses the probate trigger entirely. The liquid assets follow the property designation automatically. He was quiet. I watched him trying to decide whether to trust me. He wanted to. Greed has a way of making people want to believe there is a shortcut, especially when the alternative is waiting and hoping and having no control. He wanted there to be a magic move that delivered everything without consequences. I was offering him that move. The problem, I continued, is that an LLC transfer has to be structured correctly, or it raises its own flags, especially in a coastal county. There are certain title transfer codes, specific language in the operating agreement, ways of designating the beneficiary class that make it look like a business acquisition rather than an estate maneuver. If you do it wrong, you trigger a gift tax assessment, and the IRS sends a letter within 60 days. My mother made a small sound. I know how to do it correctly, I said. I do this for work. He looked at me for a long moment. The suspicion was there. It was always going to be there with him. He was a man who had spent 15 years in a house with a stepdaughter he'd treated as furniture. And now that furniture was telling him she had exactly the skill set he needed, at exactly the moment he needed it. He didn't like coincidences. He didn't like owing anyone anything, especially not me. But he liked losing the beach house even less. Fine, he said. What do we need? I'll need access to the estate documents and the county recorder's database. And your signature on an authorization form that designates me as the transfer agent. Standard language. Means I can execute the LLC filing on behalf of the estate without requiring your physical presence at the county office. He nodded. My mother finally looked up. I want to be clear, my stepfather said. Once this LLC is set up, the property transfers to the family account. The operating agreement designates the beneficiary class, I said. That's the document that controls who receives the asset. I'll draft it tonight. He nodded again. He thought we were talking about the same beneficiary class. We were not. I excused myself to make a phone call. In the hallway outside the kitchen, I stood with my back to the wall and let myself breathe for exactly 4 seconds. Then I called my colleague Marcus, who had been my paralegal for 6 years and who had helped me close 143 estate transfers, 4 of which had involved contested family situations not entirely unlike this one. I need you to set up an LLC in South Carolina tonight, I said quietly. Single member. I'll send you the operating agreement language in an hour. I need a registered agent on file by morning, and I need the articles of organization stamped and dated today. Also get me a remote notary on standby for 10 o'clock tonight. Preferably someone we've used before. Marcus asked one question. Is this the grandmother situation? Yes, I said. He said he'd have everything ready by 9. I went back to the kitchen. The rest of that day was deliberate and slow. I sat with my mother on the back porch while my stepfather made his own calls. We didn't talk about the will. We didn't talk about my grandmother. My mother asked me about my apartment. Asked me whether I was seeing anyone. Asked me whether I'd thought about moving somewhere warmer. Small talk stretched across the surface of everything we were not saying to each other. I looked at her hands wrapped around a glass of iced tea and I tried to remember when it had shifted. When she had stopped being the woman who drove me to soccer practice and become something more complicated. Something that flinched when I walked into a room because my presence reminded her of choices she'd made that she couldn't take back. I was 12 when she married my stepfather. I was 14 when Derek was born and I became the older kid from the first marriage. The one who got the smaller bedroom and the hand-me-down backpack and the particular silence that falls over a family when a child is loved less than the others and everyone has decided not to acknowledge it. I used to think the worst of it was the money. The $23,000 college fund that evaporated the year Derek needed braces and my stepfather's landscaping business had a bad season. The car insurance they stopped paying when I turned 18 because, my stepfather explained, I was an adult now. The security deposit on my first apartment that I had to borrow from my grandmother because I had asked my mother first and she had said she would need to ask my stepfather, and then she hadn't asked my stepfather, and we had never spoken about it again. But sitting on that porch, I realized the money had never been the worst of it. The worst of it was the way my mother was looking at me now with something that was almost hope, almost apology, almost love, but stopped just short of all 3. The worst of it was knowing she was aware of exactly what her husband was attempting to do and was sitting here asking me about my apartment instead of saying anything about it. Because she had decided, 17 years ago, that the peace in her house was worth whatever it cost someone else. Specifically, whatever it cost me. I smiled at her. I answered her questions. I helped her carry the dishes in when it got dark. At 9:45, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. My stepfather came in from the living room and sat across from me. My mother stood at the counter. The house was quiet except for the sound of the ceiling fan and something low playing on the television in the other room. I've prepared the LLC operating agreement, I said, turning the screen toward him. The entity is called Hartwell Coastal Properties. Single-member structure, registered tonight in South Carolina. The articles of organization are filed. I have a notary available by video call to execute the deed transfer and the beneficiary designation. He looked at the screen. He moved his lips slightly, reading the document, the way he always did when he was trying to look like he understood something he didn't. What's the beneficiary class designation? He said. Right there, I pointed. Paragraph 4. It reads, all distributable assets of the entity, including real property held in trust under the operating agreement, shall be distributed to the managing member of record at the time of liquidation. He looked at it. Managing member. That's us? That's whoever signs as the managing member on the operating agreement, I said, which will be established in the signature block on the next page. He nodded slowly, and I watched the calculation moving behind his eyes. He was thinking about the beach house. He was thinking about the $190,000 life insurance check. He was thinking about the business debts and Derek's truck and the renovation he'd been promising my mother for 3 years. He was doing math and it was coming out in his favor, and that math was making him careless. He should have read page 3. He should have read paragraph 7, subsection B, which designated the managing member not as the signing party, but as the party whose name appeared on the articles of organization already filed with the South Carolina Secretary of State. My name. The notary appeared on the screen. She was professional, efficient, and had worked with me on 11 previous remote closings. She confirmed identities, confirmed the document set, confirmed that all parties were signing voluntarily and without duress. My stepfather initialed every page. He signed the signature block at the bottom of page 6 without pausing. My mother signed as a witness. The notary stamped the record. The seal turned green on the screen. I looked at my stepfather across the table. I looked at the man who had eaten my grandmother's cooking at Christmas for 15 years without learning her middle name. I looked at the man who had referred to me, once, in a conversation he didn't know I could hear, as the overhead cost of keeping my mother happy. I looked at him and I felt something settle in my chest that had been waiting a long time to land. I closed the laptop, and then I picked up the quitclaim deed he had slid across the table at 7:45 that morning, the one with the blank spaces where his intentions had been. I looked at it for a moment. Then I walked to the paper shredder my grandmother had always kept by the back door, the one she used for junk mail and expired coupons, and I fed it in. The machine whirred. The paper came out in strips. My stepfather was completely still. What did you just do? He said. He watched me come back to the table and sit down. He watched me fold my hands in front of me. His face had not yet decided what it was doing. The LLC has been filed, I said. Hartwell Coastal Properties is a single-member entity, registered tonight, with the managing member of record as designated in the Articles of Organization submitted to the South Carolina Secretary of State at 9:17 this evening. I have a confirmation email if you'd like to see it. He looked at me. The managing member is me, I said. Silence. My mother turned from the counter. The operating agreement you signed establishes the transfer of my grandmother's beach cottage and all associated estate liquid assets into the entity. The deed transfer executes automatically upon probate closure, which my grandmother's attorney is processing now. The beneficiary class, as defined in paragraph 4, distributes to the managing member. That's me. He stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. You tricked us. No, I said. I gave you exactly what you asked for. You wanted the estate in an LLC. It is. You wanted a clean transfer that bypassed the probate trigger. It does. You wanted a beneficiary designation. There is one. You signed a document, and you got exactly what the document said. I'd suggest reading more carefully next time. His face had gone the color of old concrete. You had no right. I had every right, I said. My grandmother left her estate to me. You attempted to coerce me into signing it away using a fraudulent quitclaim deed before 8 in the morning. I still have the document. I have photographs of it with the timestamp from when you put it in front of me. My car's dashcam caught the arrival time. I have 6 days of text messages in which you threatened, implied, and pressured. I'm a licensed title attorney. I keep records. He looked at my mother. She was holding the counter with both hands. We'll contest the will, he said. We'll go to the court and tell them you manipulated the transfer. I looked at him calmly. You're welcome to explain to a probate judge why you asked me to sign a blank quitclaim deed at 7:45 in the morning the week your wife's mother was buried. You're welcome to explain the business debts and what you were planning to do with a $190,000 life insurance check that was never yours. And while you're doing that, I'll be filing the notarized record of tonight's voluntary LLC transfer, executed with a witness present, in which you signed every page without objection." He was shaking. "You set a trap," he said. "I documented your attempt to steal my inheritance, and I used my professional expertise to protect it." "That's not a trap. That's Tuesday." I paused. "I have the cottage listed with a Myrtle Beach broker starting Monday. The liquid assets will transfer within 30 days of probate closing. I'd appreciate it if you didn't contact my grandmother's attorney again." "He's been instructed not to respond." My mother made a sound. Something broken and small. I looked at her. I had been waiting to see what her face would do when this moment arrived. I had told myself, in the car on the way down, that I didn't care anymore, that I had made peace with it, that she was who she was and I had built my life around the architecture of that reality, and I was fine. But looking at her now, I felt the edge of something grief-shaped. Not grief for what had been taken. Grief for what had never existed. For the mother who should have been at that table telling her husband to stop. For the woman who should have called me 6 days ago and said, "Your grandmother loved you more than anyone. She left you everything she had. I hope you know how much you were seen." She hadn't called. I picked up my bag. "I know you needed the money," I said to my mother, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "I know things have been hard, and I know you thought this was the solution, but that house is the only thing she ever built that was fully hers. And she gave it to me. I'm not giving it away." My mother opened her mouth. "I'm not angry," I said, which was true enough. I just don't have anything left to say. I drove to my grandmother's house that night. I let myself in with the key she'd given me 8 years ago, the one I'd kept on my keychain ever since, with the little sea glass charm she'd found on the beach, and pressed into my hand when I was 23, and crying on her porch, about nothing specific and everything at once. The house smelled like cedar, and a little bit like the lavender she kept in a dish on the windowsill, and it was quiet in the way that old houses are quiet, full, not empty. I sat on the porch in the dark for a long time. The ocean was 2 blocks away and I could hear it, that low, irregular rhythm that never stopped, indifferent to everything, and somehow better for it. I thought about her. I thought about the way she used to hand me a glass of sweet tea without asking if I wanted one because she always knew. I thought about how she had once told me, with the kind of directness that only old people and children have, that she had watched me for years, quietly surviving people who should have been taking care of me, and that she wanted to give me something that couldn't be borrowed against or redirected or spent on someone else's mistakes, something that was just mine. She had spent 3 years making sure it got to me. I thought about that. I let myself cry, once, into the sleeve of my jacket, and then I wiped my face and watched the dark water and said thank you out loud, to no one, or to her, which might be the same thing. 4 weeks later, I was in my office in Charlotte when Marcus knocked on the doorframe with a stack of papers and a look on his face that meant good news. "Probate closed," he said. "The beach house is yours. Clean title. Deed recorded this morning." He set the stack on my desk, and the life insurance check arrived. I looked at the figure on the confirmation page. I thought about my grandmother's hands, how they had been soft and a little spotted, and had always smelled faintly of whatever she was growing in the kitchen window. I thought about the cedar house and the sea glass keychain and 41 years of a woman building something carefully and quietly and with love so specific it had a name. My name. I authorized the transfer. The money went into the business account I'd been building for 6 years, the one earmarked for the practice I was going to open when the numbers were right. They were right now. Better than right. My mother texted me once, 3 weeks after I left. It said, "I hope you know I love you." I kept it. I didn't answer yet. I was still figuring out what was true enough to say back. My stepfather didn't contact me. His attorney sent a letter. My attorney sent a better one. We haven't heard from him since. Derek, who I found out had been sent to the house by my stepfather to recover family documents from my grandmother's filing cabinet the same night I was driving down, had been captured on her security camera, letting himself in with a spare key that had been hidden under the porch. I sent that footage to my grandmother's attorney. I also sent it to mine. It is sitting in a file, waiting to be useful. It has not yet been necessary to use it, but I am patient. The cottage is no longer listed. I took it off the market the morning after probate closed. I called the broker and told her I'd changed my mind. She laughed like she understood completely. There's a porch that faces east, and in the mornings the light comes in at an angle that turns everything gold, and it smells like cedar in the ocean. And every time I unlock that door, I feel something I don't have a word for yet, something between arriving and being known. She gave me that, and no one is ever taking it. If you have ever had to protect what was yours from the people who were supposed to protect you first, you are not alone, and you are more capable than they ever allowed you to believe.